Okay, this is take three. I'm having some issues tonight, so there are two mini tapes on there that I'll get rid of, but the other one just cut out in the middle because of some memory issue, probably on my laptop. Um, so let's try again. As Samuel Beckett says, ever try, ever fail, fail again, fail better. Okay, so I'm going to fail better this time, and at least tape my failure. Um, so later I'm going to be sharing the Chrome tab. Okay, I'm just going to go over to this sharing of the tab. Okay, so tonight we're looking at White Noise and 1985. It's recognizably a postmodern novel in the sense that the characters have as much angst as we might normally expect, but their interiority is hardly explored at all. We've kind of come full circle into the existential crisis that people are no more and no less than what their surroundings make them think and feel. So it's kind of like the Matrix on steroids in a way. So Jack Gladney seems intelligent enough, um, but his claim to fame is he got this marketing idea of starting Hitler studies at his university. And at first glance, that seems like a reasonable academic undertaking, but it actually reverses history. So instead of having a center for the study of World War II, you base these studies on a cult of personality, on Hitler, the capital H, as if he weren't the convergent point of so many forces. The Treaty at Versailles that bankrupted Germany, that set up the Weimar Republic, that set up a power vacuum that somebody like Hitler could come in and take advantage of with his thugs. The over weaponized other European countries who were paranoid and anxious to go to war again rather than be surprised by that war. So having quote unquote Hitler studies, and I think it's Murray who makes the point, although he's not intending, I don't think, to be ironic, but he says to Murray at one point, Murray says to Jack Gladney at one point, "You've done a great thing here with Hitler studies. You did it, you grew it, you nurtured it. I want to do the same thing for this." And according to the logic of what Gladney has done, the Hitler, Elvis, what difference does it make? And this is where you get into that deadening relativism of, of postmodernism and so-called post-structuralism. We're still in the realm of Waiting for Godot, where no meaning arrives in this novel, no values arrive. But unlike the tramps, all the different characters have figured out ways to, there's a moment where one of the tramps says, "Isn't it amazing how we managed to convince ourselves that we exist?" But in Godot, they don't read, they haven't fully at all. That it's like a bare minimum. The characters in White Noise have fully convinced themselves they exist, uh, but there's a lot of gaps in that belief in their existence. And on the one hand, White Noise seems relentlessly secular, but it's a strangely religious novel. It's like religion, being religious without a religion, because everybody is craving the spiritual, but they've bought into the idea that they're craving the next lifestyle, the next commodity. The word lifestyle didn't come into existence as a word until the 1930s. And how do you style your life? Think of your hairstyle. Well, we know with a hairstyle, you take hair that you have and then you style it. But usually we're pretty clear that this is my hair and then this is my hairstyle. And so you can change your hairstyle, or um, by the end of the day, the hairstyle doesn't look quite the same, but it's still your hair. Uh, but with lifestyle, what starts to happen is that the style of your life, and this is what Esther Greenwood encountered with A Vengeance, where the styling of one's life was substituted for the substance. of life. So in her poem In Plaster and in Daddy, she's lamenting, I'm hollowed out inside. I've accomplished all these things. People look at me, they if I'm performing with my beautiful white unbreakable self, they like what they see, but inside I feel yellow and weak, like a broken leg inside a cast. And that's depression. That's a modern epidemic. We're depressed because, to a certain extent, who we actually think we might be is trapped inside this cast that we're taught and encouraged to put on. That's unbreakable, um, and we expect this cast to be delivered by some kind of a Godot. Um, we've talked about your grade point average before, but one part of the attraction of a high grade point average is it feels like protection. It feels like you're someone's looking after you, whatever the GPA represents. Um, and then it's easy to not notice how much you begin to style your education to what's best for your GPA, which might or might not have educational value. So the GPA has value, but it has zero educational value. It's you have an education, and then you have a GPA, which assigns a number, but the two are completely separate. The quality of your education is not guaranteed by a 4.0 or a 2.0. You could have a greater quality of education and have a 2.0, and you could have been very good at doing what was required of you, but felt pretty much untouched by all of your studies, and you'll have a 4.0, and that's fine, and I'm not even critiquing that, but the value of the education isn't very high. And this is the other problem, is that what the GPA does, and money does this too, is it converts things of actual value into something of pseudo value because it's easier to standardize. So now your value for having gone to university for 4 years is that you can say that you have a 4.0. There's nothing in that number about your actual educational experience. They're separate. Um, and worse than that, I suppose, the danger, and we see this is what Jack Gladney falls into, is we style ourselves in relation to something outside ourselves, which we're then encouraged to see as the equivalent of our interior, of our internal. I mean, what is Jack's internal experience? What is Babette's internal experience? They don't, neither one of them seem to have one. Um, and that's why they have this paralyzing fear of death. The, the paralyzing fear of death is the inverse of their concern that they're not living, that life is being lived for them by, uh, well, by commodities, for instance, or by posing. I mean, Jack can't teach Hitler, he says, unless he's wearing his dark glasses. And they still wear their robes on campus when they're teaching. And he talks about how if you walk across campus and move your arm to check the time, and the sleeve of your black academic gown is pulled back by the motion, that looks academic. That is, any student who caught that would be like, yes, I'm in university. But it's all gesture. And again, I'm not really talking about shallow. There's something very profound about this. It'd be easier to dismiss if they were like, oh, all these shallow people. But what other kind of person is it possible to be in modernity? I mean, you don't have to live on the surface. Obviously, I don't. But then again, I've devoted my career and decades to exploring what's behind the surface. And had I gone into, a regular job after college, if I'd had debts to pay, I might be a success in some other line of work. I could be the manager of a chain of things or something. But I doubt I would have thought very much, or had been able to think very much about what's really going on behind things. I'm lucky that my job is sort of commensurate with my passion, which is an interest in the infrastructure, the apparatus behind the Wizard of Oz. And Jack, he's a professor. just like I am, except he's not like me at all, in the sense that he long ago gave up doing anything but pose. He doesn't know any German. He's tried to learn and failed miserably, and not least of all because he's taking lessons with Howard Dunlop, who's a very strange creature and who isn't a native speaker either. It's not even clear exactly how much German Dunlop even knows. But Jack doesn't care because he has to take lessons in secret because he's now the head of this major Hitler Institute. Nobody knows he doesn't know how to speak German, and so he can't be seen taking lessons in German. So he put his styling of the kind of professor he was ahead of anything he was actually doing. And this is brought out when he decides to visit Murray's class on Elvis, um, because Murray wants to start this Elvis thing, and he he takes over, and Murray's talking about Elvis's mother and the importance of Elvis's relationship to her mother, and then uh, Jack picks up from that and starts talking about Hitler's mother. And after a while, Murray's just sitting in the corner, looking with appreciation and respect, and even a little bit of awe that Jack has spun this aura around Hitler, and it's kind of dangerous when even academia succumbs to the cult of personality, to the excitement of. I mean, celebrities are sort of the patron saints of modernity. They're flawed, clearly, but they also seem to exist above and beyond the ordinary, and so we look to them as people used to look to saints, as people who had lived but who had also transcended this life, and were now in a sort of saintly um, position of somebody who had both lived and transcended. Most people, if they're lucky, live, but they don't necessarily transcend. And one of the most difficult, I think I said this in some lecture, but I don't know which class, that postmodernism is about this kind of crushing sense of chronic imminence. Everything is right in front of your face. Now, commodity culture tries to turn that into something exciting, like stores are open 24/7. Walmart's open 24/7. It burns all night long. This little nightlight to capitalism. So if you need batteries at 4 a.m., you're covered, and that's presented uh, as bliss in a way that you'll never be cut off from access to your commodities, except perhaps by not having enough money. And even then, it takes a while because you're allowed to go into crippling debt with credit cards and any other number of things to buy. So that's presented as an excess for which we should be grateful, but it's an excess that is depressing us because it's an excess that doesn't satisfy. The paradox of modernity is that we're told that what will satisfy us is more, but by definition, more can't be what satisfies you because that there's nothing satisfying about needing more. In fact, that's the antithesis of satisfaction. I mean, the Rolling Stones nailed this famously in their song "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." Actually, a song that it's played so often, and it's such a rock anthem. There really are some clever lyrics in that. And in one of the course, one of the moments where Mick Jagger is singing, he said, "I'm walking down the street, and a man comes on the radio, and he says that he's a better man than me because how white can my shirts be?" And he keeps saying, "I can't get no." Uh, Jagger kind of pointed to that. Dylan had a lot of songs that did this too. That an excess of availability of gratification is a sort of void without satisfaction. So the myth of chronically being about to be gratified, Godot's about to arrive. Godot will arrive the next deodorant that you buy, the next shade of lipstick, the next shampoo, haircut, hairstyle, lifestyle, buying a new car, a new house, a new rug. Um, what you need is more. But if what you need is more, then you're never going to have what you need, and that's modernity. And eventually, as you get exhausted pursuing that more, um, modernity is very good at not allowing you to see alternatives to that, which is maybe you have enough. Um, and maybe, in fact, worse, you're not able to see how much you have because of how conditioned you have been to want more, um, more stuff. I see contests sometimes where they're like, win stuff. And I was like, can't you even name what it is I'm going to win anymore? I don't really need to win stuff. I don't even know that I need to win, a new car or a new refrigerator, but I certainly don't need to win stuff. How did we get to a point where we didn't have to be told what it is anymore? Free stuff. Um, and you're going to just bring it home and stuff it in the closet. That's how conditioned we've become, and it's embedded in our zombie myth of turning into, dying having not lived, and then coming back not so much to life but to perpetual consumption, where we eat um, for the purpose of eating. Zombies don't need nutrition, so why are they eating? How can they be hungry? They're dead. Uh, but they're metaphors for this hungry ghost phenomenon, uh, and that's what runs the economy, and it's been stoked up for a long time. So I wanted to show you, begin with this ad from a gum which is called Extra. So more extra. I mean, what does extra gum mean? That's the brand name, but it somehow implies that even when you're holding a piece of extra gum, it's both gum and it's extra gum. It's the same weirdness as saying something is both new and improved. I mean, if it's improved, it's not new. Maybe the improvement is new, but the improvement by definition has to be done on something that's already there. So there's no such thing as new and improved. There's only the new improvement, something that already was. But commodity culture is so relentless about reinventing the future as the one you need, that it can't even admit that it builds on anything from the past. There's just no past in commodity. It's everything is an eternal present. When I was growing up, there was a Toyota ad. I think it was a Toyota ad, and someone stands next to the new car, and towards the end of the ad, they jump up into the air, and then they freeze. The camera freezes them in midair, and then the slogan for Toyota is "Oh, what a feeling." And it's transcendence. Well, it's the illusion of transcendence inside a relentless immanence. If you look at the antidepressant advertisements, they before and after pictures that you get of people who are depressed and people who aren't. The people who are depressed seem to overburdened by the past, and overburdened by worries about the past and worries about the future. And they're often pictured like inside a dark room, and out the window in the sun, you can see people playing. So depression is configured as having been exiled from immanence. And then the antidepressant, which again, I'm not against antidepressants. They can be useful, but they tend to work a lot better with the talk therapy. It's either cognitive behavior or Gestalt or something to help you practically figure out what's the source of the depression, and not simply how to alleviate the symptoms. But really, depression is the uncanny sense that the past and the present still matter in the midst of a culture that relentlessly only promotes now, the eternal now. And one of the results of that is we don't have interiority anymore. The commodities do. The commodities are living our life for us, or offering to guide us through it. So, when you think about it, who the hell has to advertise gum in the first place? But this is a very elaborate, expensive ad campaign. And you need expensive, elaborate campaigns because there's nothing to advertise. It's gum. It has sugar in it. If you want it, chew it. The way these gums go on about how they last longer and there's more flavor. What do those words even mean? Gum commercials are gum is incredibly one of the most advertised products that we have because it's so pointless to advertise it. Nobody can be in any doubt about what it is, and the distinctions that are promoted about it don't make any sense. I mean, maybe you have a favorite gum. Maybe you like Hubba Bubba better than Wrigley's, but I don't think any of us would say that the difference is vast. And the ads seem to imply that it's vast. So what's the vast difference that gum ads are promoting? It's lifestyle. It's all gum. it's amazing that we can imagine that these gums are actually different. What's different is the quality of the lifestyle that you're being offered, and then the token of your entry into this lifestyle is the gum. So the gum is like a subway token. It lets you take the ride. And subway tokens don't have any value other than indicating that you can get on the subway. So we've been seeing this from Godot and through the balcony. It's been getting kind of worse and worse, where our existence is more and more aimless, um, at the same time that it's more and more organized by market forces around us, market forces that disembed us and distantiate ourselves from ourselves and from one another. So in white noise, you can see that the dual effect of a relentless commodification, of a relentless immanence, is a self-alienation at the root. And that's not new. Self-alienation is partly a result of language. I mean, we can never say exactly what we mean. We're always going to feel somewhat alienated. Where modernity is a unique historical moment is it's the one era in human history that has declared that we can get rid of self-alienation, that you can be fully satisfied, which nobody can and nobody ever will be, and declaring that it's possible and persuading vast numbers of people that it is, moves the normal experience of alienation becomes terrifying and slips into depression. Like, I'm not happy. What's wrong with me? I'm falling behind. I'm failing. Everybody else is happier than me, which is very often not true, but nobody talks about it. And you can see that in white noise. When none of their conversations ever point to interiority. Um, the only character in white noise who still has a kind of natural interiority is Wilder, and he's not much of a hurry to learn language. He doesn't know that many words, and his mom Babette worries about it a bit. Jack worries about it some, and then there's that remarkable scene where he cries for 7 hours, and they try all the usual things, take him to the pediatrician, do this, do that. Babette kind of flees at one point, and goes off to her class to read to Mr. Treadwell and his sister. And Jack finally sets up Wilder in his lap and just leans into the keening, and it becomes more like a Gregorian chant. And Wilder seems to he's like the fire alarm of existentialism. I mean, he's going off because there's smoke everywhere, and he's the only one who sees it. He feels it. He's the only one who walks right up to his mother's face when he sees his mother on the television. He doesn't care about the television. He doesn't accept that a representation is better than a presentation. That's his mother. She's there. And then she suddenly is not. And everybody else leaves and they're excited to go see their mom and say, wow, we saw you on television. And it's only Wilder who sits there in front of the darkened television quietly crying. So, uh, and it will be Wilder that ends the novel in this astonishing fashion of just lugging his tricycle to a 6-lane highway, 3 lanes one way, 3 more lanes the other way. So pretty much the Don Valley Parkway or the 401. And for reasons that aren't particularly explained, but there's a kind of uh, natural defiance in Wilder. Like, he doesn't recognize the apparatus, so he doesn't recognize that it's a TV. He doesn't recognize that it's a highway. He reminds me a little of Charlie Chaplin in The Tramp, if those of you remember modern times. He just doesn't register what everybody else has accepted as primary reality. For Wilder, it's incidental. He's just going down the embankment with his tricycle, and he wants to get to the other side where there's more embankment, and for some reason there's something in the middle that he has to cross. Not the fact that it's a 6-lane highway, but the highways have been breaking up neighborhoods for a long time. I mean, you put in a new highway and you shut off neighborhoods. This happened in Paris in a huge way at the turn of the century, when Haussmann put in the main boulevards and just destroyed all the little areas, all the little warrens where many people lived, and began to separate into these vast wide boulevards. And they are impressive. They look impressive, but they're also about surveillance. They're about urban surveillance. It's a lot harder. There had been several revolts in Paris, and it was very hard to put down the revolt because people would disappear back into their warrens. And one of the generals that was part of the Haussmann Project famously said at one point, when asked just how wide do these boulevards need to be, and he said wide enough for a cannonball to go down them. So for the general, this was about it's going to be really it'll be a lot harder to rebel with these very wide boulevards. The rebellion will have nowhere to hide, and they'll have nowhere to run away to. Cannons, of course, would have been a weapon used against rebellion. Now we have rubber bullets and tear gas, but it's in many ways it's the same principle. It's easier to turn back a mob in a wide boulevard than in a narrow street, and it's easier to block it off, to kettle people, as it's called, if there are only two or three main boulevards that people can travel. So I want to show you the commercial, and what I'm going to run it all the way through. It's almost 2 minutes, and I think it may be more than one commercial. They may have done these as a series, and people actually were looking forward to the next chapter. And I want you to sort of think about two things. One, notice how the gum is crucial for the development of the social relation, and notice how cleverly the gum simply appears at key moments where the relationship needs to I mean, it's like a mini Hollywood romance for those of you in my other class. And then at the same time, when we get done with it, we're going to have to ask ourselves, what is lost if we take the gum out of every scene in which the gum appears? And technically, the answer is nothing. I mean, the gum isn't doing anything, and yet it's doing everything. We've gotten so blind to how much our products and commodities are selling us back a style of life that we can apply to our life, which appears to not have style. And in fact, life doesn't have style. And in the same way that your hair doesn't have style, you can style your hair, but the style of your hair isn't implicit in the hair. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a style. So we've replaced style with life. And now instead of having a life and then you style it, we have a style and then we follow it around lifelessly. That's what Jack does. He's a caricature. And this is brought home in that strange, brief, but really important scene where he's in the hardware store and he's not wearing his dark glasses or his robe, and he runs into another professor who says, "I didn't recognize you." And he's like, "Okay." And he said, you know what you look like. And he's like, and so, well, don't be offended, but you just look like a small, insignificant, not very important person. And Jack says, "Oh, well, why would I be offended?" But of course, he's kind of devastated. And what does he do? He goes shopping. There's an orgy of mall shopping where he enlists his family and says, "I am ready to buy. I mean, I was just outed without my robe and my dark glasses, and I have no life. I'm a shell. I got to plunge deeper into this illusion that the style being sold to me can be the life that I put into me." And if you read that in some of those descriptions, he gets bigger. He sees himself in mirrors everywhere. It's kind of sexual the way it's presented, as orgiastic and orgasmic. But also there's this sort of post-coital exhaustion, because after all of this shoring up, what do people want to do when they go home? They want to all go to each their individual rooms and be alone. There's a kind of morning after hangover feeling to this, and they have to go now and sort of regroup. And there's an addiction element to it, that the high that they had in the mall is they're now coming down off of that high, and they're going to have to somehow once again employ all the ideologies to regroup themselves. And of course, Dylar. Oh, I don't want to talk about Dylar yet. Although Dylar is a little like extra gum. But let me play this for you. Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help
Would it be a sin? Oh, if I can help falling in love with you. Oh, like a river flows surely to the sea, darling, so it goes. Some things are meant to be. Won't take my hand, take my whole life too. For I can't help falling in love with you. Oh, for I can't help falling in
Give extra, get extra.
love with you.
Give extra, get extra. But if you give extra and in return you get extra, have you exchanged anything? Because extra is something that's not present. Uh, so the very use of the term again is living outside your life, um, living as an appendage to a lifestyle that's supplied to you. So this gum seems to be why they met, why they fell in love. You can see how the gum is positioned every time there's a new moment where they're either going to, and my Hollywood romance people know this, move through their vulnerability to a greater intimacy. For instance, they have a fight after perhaps they're married at that point, or maybe it was a fight in their relationship. I've forgotten the order now, but and in order to kind of come back into contact, the gum is offered. And then that clever trope where he's gotten into the habit of drawing little scenes about their developing relationship onto the back of the wrapper of of the gum. So now we're not even talking about the gum. We're talking about the aluminum wrapper in which the gum comes. And I mean, in a way, this is a brilliant ad. And what it winds up saying is, we don't know how to do social relations. Um, so our commodities will guide us through it. The implication is that without the insertion of the extra that commodity culture provides, we can't develop as individually or as a couple. Um, Let me see if I can switch back to me here. Okay. So, and the novel really opens this way, where Jack has gone to see what's presented as a pilgrimage of parents bringing their children to the school, uh, and then all the station wagons are similar. The men all look like they have, as he puts it, great life insurance policies. All of the women are diet trim. There's a certain ritualistic way that they greet each other with cries and collapsing, and the men exchange glances a certain way, and the women exchange little stories about the summer, and then the actual unpacking of the cars, which is seems to occur in the background, is actually the main point. There's so much stuff, all the way down finally to what's called mystic mints, and actually that exists, and they're not bad cookies. They're not mystical, but DeLillo is I think he's being very deliberate about this. That commodities are sacred objects. There's no mysticism in modernity, so the commodities have this religious aura about them. They really seem like sacred objects, and so all of these things are getting unloaded, and this isn't a judgment on my part, but there's very little excitement. Seems to have very little to do with, wow, we're going to learn a lot. um, it's and I don't really, as I said, I don't judge that. I mean, going to university is about social relations, and especially at the age you guys are, and I get that, and so I'm not offended if everyone doesn't just rush on and say, "Oh, thank God, I can go to another Professor Leonard class." I don't take myself that seriously, but I, I do hope when you do get to these classes, they're worth your while. But um, so I wanted to read a Wallace Stevens poem, which I'll post uh, for you. It's called Sunday Morning, and it gets at this issue of how do we find the sacred in the secular. And I think it jives very well with the whole issue of dialogue. So there's two other main operating systems in white noise. One is the airborne toxic event, which is initially called a plume, a cloud plume, and then it's called something dark, and it keeps getting bigger and more dangerous. And it's strange. I don't know about you guys, but it's strange to read this novel as we struggle, as we hit the anniversary pretty much of this worldwide pandemic. 30 years, more than 30 years after DeLillo wrote this novel, and this novel is very prescient that way because DeLillo is, on the one hand, it almost seems like science fiction, or at least it did in 1985, that there could be that big a disaster. Now we read about the California fires, we read about everybody freezing in Texas and not having any water. We see 500,000 people in the U.S. are dead in this past year. The U.S. has never had a war in its history that even came close to that. It's like 4 times everybody who died in World War II. And as far as we know, nobody even is shown dying in the airborne toxic event in white noise. There is concern, and Jack got out of the car to pump gas at one point, so he was exposed. And they're not entirely sure what that means. It could be that he's dying, it's killing him so slowly that he won't die any sooner than he probably would have through aging. But it does fit neatly into his terror of dying. But frankly, this terror of dying is a refusal to acknowledge a fear that they're not living. Because one way to ease your fear that you're not living is to keep thinking you'll have time. And then as you get older, that becomes less and less credible. And then, the so-called midlife crisis probably is one of the, which might happen in, say, your 40s. That's probably that first intimation of, wow, I'm getting to a point where I've probably more years behind me than I have in front of me. I'm going to have to make it past 100 now to live more than I've already lived. So I'm dealing with that for sure. That by any biological account, I've lived more years than I'm likely to live, and that is sobering. It does bring you to, and if Jack doesn't develop as a character through the entire novel, and maybe the children have a chance. It's hard to know. Effie and Denise are both falling into patterns of worrying about their clueless parents. Heinrich is an interesting character. He may come through as a new Murray in a way. He seems to be a natural professor in a way. It's startling that he's a better professor than his father when they go to the Boy Scout camp, refugee camp, and people gather around to listen to him as he starts talking about, we don't know how to repair anything. We don't know. He's just saying it straight. And Babette wants to be more idealistic than that. And Jack also, who's more of a modernist. Heinrich's a pure postmodernist. And he's comfortable with it. When he has the scene where he triumphs over his father, where they're driving in the car, and his father says, "Oh, it's raining," and Heinrich says, "Well, the weather report said it will rain later tonight," and this of course annoys Jack, and he's like, "Well, it's raining now," and Heinrich's like, "How do you know that?" So I see it. It's on the windshield. It's in drops. It's dripping down. He's like, "Well, how do you know that's rain?" He said, "Well, it has to be rain. Isn't it rain?" Because I don't know. It could be sulfuric acid. It could be something from aliens. You don't know whether it's raining or not. And then he's like, "Well, okay, some guy named Fred is holding a gun to your head, and he's saying, now, tell me, is it raining? Is it not? If you tell me the truth, I won't blow your head off." And Heinrich's like, "Whose truth? His truth? My truth?" And finally, in exasperation, Jack's like, "Rain is that stuff that gets you wet. And then Heinrich says, "Are you wet? I'm not wet." And because they're inside the car, and Jack gives up and says, "Okay, fine, a triumph for, you know, postmodern cynicism," or something that I'm paraphrasing. And Heinrich's like, "No, seriously, are you wet?" So Heinrich's like, "You can't trust your senses. Your senses are not the truth." And when I think later in the novel, Heinrich's asked to make another decision, I think whether he wants to go see his mother or not, and he goes, "Well, how do I know? I mean, decisions are just chemical reactions." And so in a weird way, Heinrich has found his purpose becoming a professor of the degree to which the world is purposeless. That's become his point. You know, Heinrich has a point. There's no point. I may sound like Heinrich sometimes in this class because it is one defense against the apparatus. If you feel like you're in the grip of the apparatus, then it doesn't, you have nothing to lose to go into a kind of relativism because everything you're being shown has been pre-constructed to make you feel, to manipulate you. And if you can't figure out how you're being manipulated, you can at least stop performing according to the directives, and then you'll recognize that these forces are not coming from you. I mean, the ideal ad campaign is to make you feel like you want the product. You don't even know what the product is. You never heard of the product until you saw the advertisement. So the advertisement has to somehow get behind you until it feels like your idea. There's nothing more persuasive than to get somebody to do what you want by persuading them it's what they want. And I mean, that's what seduction is. We think about it in sexual terms, usually, like, you want to go to bed with me. Oh, yeah, I guess I do. And the next day, like, I don't think so. You know, what happened? So seduction, propaganda, is the art of getting people to act against their best interests when those best interests are interfering with your pursuit of more, with your pursuit of extra. So Sunday Morning is a poem about, partly about a woman who just wakes up on Sunday morning. Now, Sunday morning, certainly in the Christian tradition and in different religions, sometimes it's Saturday, sometimes it's Sunday. What's the holy day? You know, if there's a holy day once a week typically, and then there are also holy days throughout the year in what, you know, Ramadan or Christmas or different, and they're all very important special days. So Sunday Morning is partly about the fact that what are the special days in modernity? One day is the same as every other day. And again, that suits commodity culture because every day is a good day to consume. Um, and in fact, Sunday, you know, the so-called blue laws in Toronto had these, hung on to these for longer than most. It used to be, you know, bars had to be closed on Sunday, shops, malls, everything closed on Sunday because in the Christian tradition, it was the day that God rested after creating the world for 6 days. And so it was the day to not work and to go to church. Certainly, the Jewish, Orthodox Jewish faith can still be quite strict about this, and not using electronics, not driving. Um, on this day, we are supposed to remember that all that stuff is external, um, and it takes you into a mode of contemplation. So if nobody's working, nobody has anywhere to go, there aren't traffic jams, you can sit in a quiet church that's dimly lit and with candles and not be late for something. Uh, but so what have we suffered and what's left if that has dissipated? So Sunday Morning begins complacencies of the peignoir and late coffee and oranges in a sunny chair, and the green freedom of a cockatoo upon a rug mingle to dissipate the holy hush of ancient sacrifice. So in the opening line of this poem, and as I said, I'll print this for you so you can listen to me read it while you're looking at it. We go from a nicely appointed bedroom, you know, like top line IKEA, or maybe even better than that. But the word is complacency, the complacencies of interior decorating, of our drapes, our pillows, our mattress, our rug. And again, not to say we shouldn't have any of those things, but those things make things softer, they smooth out things, they color coordinate things. So they do instill churches don't are often not very comfortable seating. And there's kind of a point to that. You're not there to lounge on a lazy boy recliner. They're not as comfortable seating as a cinema, for instance. And so and there's a reason for that. You're there to be aware of yourself apart from the comfort of your immediate surroundings. So Stevens makes the point that our emphasis on interior decorating and IKEA comes to mind. There's that scene in Fight Club, where with the price tag of all the IKEA things in his apartment start to announce themselves. And IKEA is an astonishingly successful because it's affordable but sleek furniture, veneer, of course, and it falls apart, and you have to have a PhD in engineering to put them together, and as well as read 6 languages. But in they smooth out surfaces, and when you go into an IKEA store, you don't see things in not until you go to the warehouse portion, where you see whole rooms, and there's like fake computers on them, so you're invited to see yourself in the space, and essentially you buy the room. And we're back to my elevator metaphor, that if modernity is an elevator shaft where you could fall to your 25 levels to your death, then the IKEA room is a place to go that lets you not worry about that. So complacencies of the peignoir, the interior decorating, it's a buffering against death constantly. And dialogue is the worst thing. That's the last thing we need, and it's the thing we want most. A final sort of lobotomy that eliminates an awareness of death, and this is pursued as the holy grail of modern pharmaceuticals. And in some ways, it reads like a super antidepressant. The ultimate antidepressant, if it eliminated our fear of death, would take us away from all that midlife crisis stuff of what does my life mean. We wouldn't feel the pressure of having a meaningful life because we wouldn't be aware that dying mattered. And that's a terrible thing to remove, because death is the ultimate arbiter of meaning and value. There is no other. I mean, part of the wanting Godot to come, these tramps they're also acting like every day is the same as the day before, which is also an anti-aging ploy. Like, we don't know what day it is. We're doing what we did last time. He didn't come yesterday. He's sure to come today. It resets the clock. And so, as unhappy as they are and as bored as they are, they've also, in their own minds at least, they've suspended their own aging. And we know that it can't be true. You can forget about death. Death is not going to forget about you. And okay, let me read more of Wallace Stevens, because he says this a little more abstractly, but very beautifully. Uh, she dreams a little, and she feels the dark encroachment of that old catastrophe as a calm darkens among water lights. So the old catastrophe here is partly Stevens was a Christian, so the crucifixion of Christ is the ancient sacrifice and the old catastrophe. But that's within a Christian context, but really any religion deals with ancient sacrifices and old catastrophes, so the burning of mosques, or the assassination of religious leaders. There are lots of old catastrophes and ancient sacrifices. And again, they give traction to life. And you've heard me on this before, that modernity doesn't reward or promote or encourage sacrifice. That what's the point of, as the gum commercial, which is weird because gum is one of those things it's fun to give away because it's cheap. I mean, almost anyone would, if they take out a pack of gum and they're with someone else, or even 2 other people, they're gonna say, would anyone like a piece of gum? If they don't, they're kind of rude. But because what is it? Like, it's you're just gonna chew it and let everybody watch you. I mean, I don't chew gum myself. I mean, I don't have any like objection to it. I just don't think about it. So I would probably say, oh no, thanks, no. But I probably would notice if they didn't offer me a piece. Not because I wanted one, but because I'd be like, huh, that didn't feel very social. So gum is already one of those things that you can look up and say, anybody else want one, and create a little bit of community that way. But notice how this gum commercial says, give extra, get extra. So it actually deprives gum of its traditional role, where you sacrifice a piece and you give it to someone else. You're not going to ask for your gum back after they chew it. So you didn't give the gum with the expectation that it's a loan. They're not going to give you the gum back. Um, you gave it away, and you meant to give it away, and you want it to be understood that you're giving it away because you value their presence, and more than hanging on to an extra piece of gum. Sacrifice. uh, so she dreams a little, the old catastrophe. As encroachment of that old catastrophe, as a calm darkens among water lights, the pungent oranges and bright green wings seem things in some procession of the dead, winding across wide water without sound. So these green wings, there's a rug with a cockatoo on it. It's like a sort of some kind of IKEA thing. So it's getting more and more blurry as she's half asleep, half dreaming. And it's when she's half asleep and half dreaming that, what is life, what is death, it becomes mingling in the complacency that the room is intended, or the dialogue is intended to buffer you from, dissipates. Um, and so winding across wide water without sound, the day is like wide water without sound. That would be a holy day, like wide water without sound. How many of our days are like that? It's full of agendas and phones dinging. Um, Stilled for the passing of her dreaming feet over the seas to silent Palestine, dominion of the blood and sepulchre. Palestine, of course, is the cradle of at least three religions. In this case, we're talking about Christ, but Muhammad and the Judaic tradition, all uh, you know, if not originate, come out of the area of Palestine. And then we come into the second stanza, and this is where the woman's sort of waking up a bit more. So she pushes back against the idea of sacrifice, and she says, "Why should she give her bounty to the dead? Like why should I sacrifice in my living life for dead people, Christians, Christ himself, others? I have all this life, but this is like the gum. This is like the falling into that illusion that extra is the same as value and meaning. More is simply more. Stuff is just stuff. Accumulation is not wisdom. And but honestly, you did wisdom is, as William Blake says, wisdom is sold in the marketplace where nobody comes to buy. They're all over Costco. So what is divinity if it can come only in silent shadows and in dreams? So the divinity and sacrifice, they have no role. What's the point of them? You can't sell them, you can't monetize them, you can't advertise them. Shall she not find in comforts of the sun, in pungent fruit and bright green wings, or else in any balm or beauty of the earth, things to be cherished like the thought of heaven? Divinity must live within herself. Passions of rain, or moods in falling snow, grievings in loneliness, or unsubdued elations when the forest blooms, gusty emotions on wet roads on autumn nights, all pleasures and all pains, remembering the bough of summer and the winter branch. These are the measures destined for her soul. But the mistake that the woman's making, of course, is its mortality. It makes all of these things so inexpressibly magnificent and divine. Divinity is the awareness of the ephemerality of joy. Um, and if you refuse the ephemerality of joy, which commodity culture does, you should have joy every minute, every second. Then you exclude divinity. There is divinity in loss. More an extra is actually not as defining for us as less and loss. We have a total intolerance for loss in this culture. And I'm not saying, oh, it's good to lose things. I'm saying you lose things anyway. And to live in a culture that insists that you shouldn't have to lose anything, and then of course you do, relationships, loved ones, um, then you have a fear of death, uh, or a lingering dread at the base of everything. So we need divinity is is the result of the ephemerality of joy. I like that phrase. I just made it up. Maybe I'll put that in one of my poems. So the bough of summer and the winter branch. So you see the contrast here. Like how do you? We're coming into spring now, and how can you have spring if you didn't have winter? And of course, there's places in the world where they barely do have winter or spring. Parts of California, for instance. And there's something. I mean, winter can be such a pain. Uh, but there, without that being out there in freezing when it's dark at 5:30, you're not have that emerging sense of wonder and appreciation as it stays lighter longer. You see buds on the end of the trees. I mean, take a walk with a kid if you like Wilder, and if you want to be reminded of this. I mean, even now with my 14-year-old, it takes me forever to walk around the block because he's looking at all the buds. And when he was like 3, it was impossible. Every crack in the sidewalk had to be interrogated. Every bug, every worm, and the endless questions. Why is the worm dead? Is the worm dead? And on and on and on. And so I was like, my God, are we going for a walk? We've been out here for a year. Um, but I also knew that he was right, and that I was the one who needed to look at his example. All my degrees, all the books I published, and he was the one showing wisdom. Like we're here. The wonder is here, Dad. It's not in your next book or your raise or your car or whatever. It's this acorn that just fell out of a tree. That is so much more interesting than anything else. Um, and that connectedness that we lose, we just lose touch with that as we give over to the myth of accumulation. So then he talks about older religions. Jove in the clouds, he said, had his inhuman birth. No mother suckled him. No sweet land gave large mannered motions to his mythy mind. He moved among us as a muttering king, magnificent, would move among his hinds that steer, until our blood, commingling, virginal with heaven, brought such requital to desire, the very hinds discerned it in a star. So Stevens is describing the shift from polytheism to monotheism, which of course both the Judaic and the Islamic tradition move from polytheism to monotheism. And certainly in a Christian tradition, is a mingling of blood, and that Christ was seen to have been, the Son of God. Um, and yet, in a way, Muhammad, because Muhammad was taking down the, the, the living words of God, that there's a certain commingling in the Islamic tradition too that is unique, and that is a departure from polytheistic traditions like with Job, the one true God. So shall our blood fail, or shall it come to be the blood of paradise? And shall the earth seem all of paradise that we shall know? The sky will be much friendlier then than now, a part of labor and a part of pain, and next in glory to enduring love, not this dividing and indifferent blue. So this whole issue of heaven is now going to come up. Like, what is this idea of, is there a heaven? What does that even mean? And whether there's literally a heaven in any kind of geographical sense. Again, the notion of divinity being the ephemerality of joy. There is something beyond the present pleasure, and we can call it heaven. Like some people, something fun happens, like you have a great ice cream cone or something. You go, oh my God, I'm in heaven. And what you're partly saying there is, this is amazing, and more amazing than it was before I had this taste of this ice cream, and more amazing than it will be when this ice cream cone is gone. So heaven is actually also based on loss. It's heaven is the reminder that loss is the prelude to to a more substantial gain. Um, and if you never lose anything, you never get the experience of gaining. Of everything is just always being handed to you. You know, the sort of the plight of the child of the rich man. Dare I say, Donald Trump, where one is given everything, one requires more until the pursuit of more evacuates any pleasure in what one has. So then he talks a little bit more about these different paradises in different religion. Um, so there is not any haunt of prophecy, nor any old chimera of the grave, neither the golden underground, nor isle melodious where spirits gat them home, nor visionary south, nor cloudy palm remote on heaven's hill that is endured as April's green endures, or will endure, like her remembrance of awakened birds, or her desire for June and evening, tipped by the consummation of the swallow's wings. She says, but in contentment I still feel the need of some imperishable bliss. So that now we've made that distinction between contentment, complacency, bliss, and then the bliss has to be imperishable. And that gets back to another way to think about the meaning of life. Like, what have you given that endures? And he uses the word endure like 5 times. And you can consuming is the opposite of endure. Consuming can feel like endure because there's always more to consume. But enduring is actually experiencing without consumption, without leaning on the delusion that accumulation is wisdom. Um, so, is there no change of death in paradise? Stevens asks. Does ripe fruit never fall? Or do the boughs hang always heavy in that perfect sky, unchanging, yet so like our perishing earth, with rivers like our own that seek for seas they never find? The same receding shores that never touch with inarticulate pang? Why set the pear upon those river banks, or spice the shores with odors of the plum? Alas, that they should wear our colors there, the silken weavings of our afternoons, and pick the strings of our insipid lutes. Death is the mother of beauty, mystical, within whose burning bosom we devised our earthly mother's waiting sleeplessly. Now that's the heart of the poem. Death is the mother of beauty, mystical, not mystic mint being unloaded from the cars of the college students, and within whose burning bosom we devise our earthly mother's waiting. So there's a lot of mixture of paradise and earth, and what Stevens is trying to get at is paradise is on earth, heaven is on earth, but not as some promised prize of complacency and content, but the passion, the burning bosom of earthly mothers who wait for us sleeplessly always. There's a mother waiting to gather us up in the beauty of foliage or flowers or a walk or the look of a loved one. It's gathered, ready to gather us up, but it's an inward turning, not an outward exhaustion. And then in the poem, there's an imagination of a new religion starting, bursting out of modernity. Supple and turbulent, a ring of men shall chant in orgy on a summer morn in their boisterous devotion to the sun, not as a god, but as a god might be, naked among them like a savage source. Their chant shall be a chant of paradise, out of their blood returning to the sky, and in their chant shall enter, voice by voice, the windy lake wherein their Lord delights, the trees like seraphim and echoing hills, that choir among themselves long afterward. They shall know well the heavenly fellowship of men that patient of summer morn, and whence they came, and whither they shall go, the dew upon their feet shall manifest. And here's a sense of that the kind of ritual and tradition that's springing up again in a sun worship, one of the most basic forms of worship, is it returns time the time of seasons, the time of living, the time of dying, and uh, and a sense that we came from a great many people, and a great many people will come from us, and that's the cult of individualism in modernity. It's so isolating that yes, ultimately we live and die alone, but our life is not conducted in a vacuum. We we make impressions on those around us, those who are younger than us, those who are older than us. And there's no one's necessarily, I mean, you can make a monument to yourself. I wanted to make one for Dolly Parton. She's like, oh, knock it off. I don't need a monument. You can put one up later when I'm dead if you want. Um, because really, what's enduring about one's life? Well, the only thing that can possibly be enduring is your effect on other people. And in 5 generations or less, people may not remember their great 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 grandfather, but they will have been affected. And so a way to make your life endure is to be willing to give it away, in order to keep it, because you're going to be gone one way or the other. So the only thing you're going to be able to leave behind is what you gave away when you were here. Um, she hears upon that water without sound a voice that cries, the tomb in Palestine is not the porch of spirits lingering. It is the grave of Jesus where he lay. So it's this kind of reminder that religion is also about the living, um, and not we shouldn't just we don't want to treat religion as yet another buffer against our fear of death. Like, do the right things, we'll go to heaven. If that's not really the way we're supposed to look at it. Like, cheat death by being good. It's more that you want to have lived all the life available, so that when you leave it, as you will, whether you wish it or not, it will be something you can leave behind. And the concern, the zombies die and they come back because they didn't leave anything behind. And now that's too late. They don't know how. And so they just kind of go back to their default of just consuming and accumulating, in this case, the flesh of the living people, almost as if they want to eat life so they come back to life, and this time live it. We live in an old chaos of the sun, or old dependency of day and night, or island solitude, unsponsored, free of that wide water, inescapable. But we're both free of the wide water, and also the wide water is inescapable. Deer walk upon our mountains, and the quail whistle about us in their spontaneous cries. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness. And in the isolation of the sky at evening, casual flocks of pigeons make ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness on extended wings. And that's the conclusion of the poem. No, but notice that the beauty of life is in the motion. It's in the in-betweenness. It's not in the accomplishment. It's not in the start, the middle, or the beginning. It's in the swoop and the swerve and the spontaneous. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness. How can you calculate ripening? And that's our other problem. Is it capitalism and late modernity? If you can't calculate it, it doesn't exist. But one could flip that and say the only things that exist are what you can't calculate. And but that doesn't suit our ideology. Calculate how much you're worth. Calculate how many of these things you can buy. So let me. So that's, as I said, that's a poem I'll post, and we can talk about it, in the open classroom too, if we wish, because that will be game. I could take a quote from that. Obviously, it would probably be something along the lines of "Death is the mother of beauty." So if we go back to White Noise, having looked at this rather intense search for the sacred and the secular, we can notice, that Murray is a kind of prophet. And when they go to see the most photographed barn in America, that's a really famous set piece from this novel. And it's kind of getting at these dynamics I've been trying to outline so far in this lecture, where they see five signs before they even get to the barn that says approaching the most photographed barn in America. So the barn is famous for being photographed, or it's a famous barn and that's why it's photographed. But what's this about photography? And in some ways, the photography is like the gum in the commercial I showed you at the beginning of today's lecture. Is it has nothing to do with what the barn represents, which is once upon a time it was a functional barn. People stored grain. There were mice. There were cats. There were people. There were bales of hay. Um, that's not how we produce. That's not how we farm anymore. So these farmhouses are now, nostalgic. And for some reason, this one is photographed all the time. It's probably now being preserved. It's a tourist attraction. And when Murray gets there, he looks around and he finally says, "Nobody sees the barn," and that's close to what Wallace Stevens is getting at too. Can you see the sacred that portends in everything? But you're going to have to see it for what it is, and not for how it might represent something more. I mean, they sell pictures of the barn in the gift shop, and they stop and they listen to the whir of the cameras going shh, shh, shh. Nobody's seeing the barn. Everybody's taking a picture of the barn, and that's a lot like going to a party and taking lots of pictures and then going home to see whether you had a good time or not on Facebook. Weren't you there? Well, I don't know. That might have been the most photographed party in Canada. And so there is that temptation to, again, confuse preservation with experiencing. Um, and then, of course, we sort through the pictures and we post, quote unquote, the best. Now, is that what happened at the party? Or is this our reproduction of a way that we would like to think the party went, and for the consumption of our friends, both those who were at the party and those who weren't? One of the things people say all the time, I challenge you to get, well, in COVID, you could probably get through a day without hearing it. But in a normal day, you can't get through the day without somebody saying, have fun. Now, I don't mean to sound like a Scrooge, but I don't know why I have to have fun all the time, or why. Sometimes it feels like a command, and I'll say, well, I'm just heading off to class. Okay, well, have fun. It's like, why? And I don't, and I don't mean that I can't have fun, but what's this with fun? It starts to feel oppressive. Everything's not fun, thank God. I don't find fun that fun, at least in whatever I understand it to be. But I find, reading Wallace Stevens' poetry fun. Nobody else does, or very few people. But there is, half the time when people say have fun, I hear them saying consume or be entertained, be distracted. But if all you want to do is have fun, Cyndi Lauper, girls just want to have fun. You are letting yourself open to depression, because you will not be able to. Not having fun will panic you, and then your panic will panic you, and there'll be a downward slide. Like, I'm not having any fun, or it's my birthday and I'm not having fun. It's Valentine's Day and I'm not having any fun. What's so terrible about not having fun? I would much rather not have fun than be depressed because I think I should be having fun. So I just try and cut out the middleman. Like, well, I didn't expect to have fun, and I was right. That doesn't mean I'm miserable. See that this assumption that if you're not having fun, you're miserable. I don't understand that. Just X out that whole spectrum of feelings. I'm kind of a contemplative person, so I don't even quite know how to act when I'm around people who are trying to have fun. I always found New Year's Eve nightmarish. People trying so hard to have fun as midnight approaches, which really just seems to mean drinking until it feels like fun, but that's not fully real either. So white noise lets us know that the mystical is all around us. In like the grocery store is basically the church of this novel. Um, and Murray just hangs out in the grocery store. He's fascinated with the boxes, and he doesn't see them. He doesn't care about the advertising on the boxes. For him, he sees the color, the color packaging as a symptom of how life's being drained out of people. And even though he himself only buys generic food without the packaging, Wilder celebrates the the packages, the color, but it's just a color. Um, it's not that it's Cheerios or it's, we know that the color is about trying to make their brand pop so that you buy their brand and not someone else's brand. But the way DeLillo sets it up is we've allowed our life force to bleed out into our packaging, and and so our packaging is incredibly colorful because we're feeling gray and listless, and the over packaging. That I always feel weird when I'm unwrapping something, and there's this package, and it's got this picture on it and all this information, um, and I don't need it. I'm unpacking it for 5 seconds, and then putting it uh, in the recycles. And this isn't even an ecological point as so much as uh, you know, how did we get to this point? Because even 100 years ago, there was no packaging. If you wanted a bar of soap, you went into a general store, and there was a giant thing of soap about as big as your dining room table, and he'd say how much, and he'd lop off a chunk of it and wrap it in brown wax, and that was it. You just bought soap. Walk into Shoppers Drug Mart, and the hallucination of the bleed out of life into the packaging is astonishing. I mean, I think Shoppers Drug Mart reminds me more of what DeLillo's probably trying to get at with this grocery store. Um, so Dylar, as as we come to realize, is, well, in the end, it doesn't even work. And interestingly, I think one of its side effects is that you can't tell the difference between a word and a thing. So when Jack goes to shoot, well, he's called Willie Mink, and I think he's got another name, Gray. His last name is Gray. But in any event, the guy who supposedly invented dialar and then is taking vast amounts of it himself, and then basically exploited sex from Babette, took advantage of her fear of death, and demanded sex in return for supplying the Dylar. And part of this is about Jack and Babette's marriage. He has set up Babette as someone who doesn't fear death, so they can be a ballast against his profound fear of death. And Babette's found her trapped in that. She's not allowed to be afraid of death because Jack's afraid of death enough for both of them. So in a way, she gets set up for wanting this drug so that she can be what Jack positions her as, someone who doesn't fear death, but she does. So she goes looking for a drug that will allow her to stop fearing it. And the sex with Mink is pointless to her, and just, if anything, just speaks to her anxiety about keeping the balance in the marriage with Jack, um, in a way that because he's positioned her falsely, and given her no room to ever have her own fear of death. And they aren't able to share in the relationship, and they worry all the time, like, which one of us is going to die first. Jack can't imagine dying before Babette, and he can't imagine continuing to live after she dies. But there's this massive missing the point that they're there now, or are they? I mean, when are these people all present to each other? Jack has been married 5 times, twice to the same woman. He produced 2 different children. I mean, you need a chart to keep track of all of the different children that Jack had in his 5 marriages. They're not even all there. Some of them are older. The mom, his ex-wives cycle in and out. We see one of Babette's exes, along with her father, who shows up with the gun. Um, a lot of people have noticed that the children are taken for granted in this novel to a remarkable extent. I mean, they're taking care of the parents, and they're very resilient, but they're constantly being taking jet planes to go visit their mom in an ashram, and at one point she's like, well, Dad, will you come get me if I'm kidnapped? They're trying to get through this, and they're trying to, in their own ways, they're trying to organize their world. So Heinrich's weird friend wants to stay 67 days in a cage full of poisoned snakes, and Jack's horrified and fascinated. But the desperation of the teenagers to make life have a point, even if they completely manufacture it. And so Mercator is so upset when he can only scrape up 3 snakes, and one of them bites him right away, and then it turns out it's not even poisonous. So now he's just avoiding people, and a lot of this is comical, but it's kind of comical the way Waiting for Godot is comical. It's a dark comedy, a sort of if you don't laugh, you'll cry. Um, so I'm becoming conscious of the time, and we will have an open class on this where I hope you'll direct me to other things about this novel um, that you found interesting, and I hope I've been able to outline what's at stake sufficiently so that you can fill in some of the blanks for yourself. That's usually part of the intention of the way I lecture. Um, so just to give you one quote about Jack, as he puts items in his shopping cart, Jack says the following: I filled myself out, found new aspects of myself, located a person I'd forgotten existed. Brightness settled around me. I was bigger than these sums. These sums poured off my skin like so much rain. These sums, in fact, came back to me in the form of existential credit. This is when he's in the mall, just buying, compulsively and randomly. So his marketplace experience actually parodies commercials where shopping, remedies problems of identity and self-esteem. I mean, look at any laundry ads. We store the identity and self-esteem of the housewife, which of course it doesn't really, but that's how the soap is set up. That the family loves her because their clothes smell better because she used the soap, and the soap insinuates itself into the social relation in the same way that gum does in the commercial that I showed you. So Jack has no existential experience. It's a failure of self-awareness. There's a fake self-awareness, which is doubly bad because it's also blocking self-awareness. This is the problem with a lot of drugs, like OxyContin, and they exaggerate the natural chemicals in the brain to such an extent that the brain stops producing them, and then if you get cut off from the OxyContin or the heroin, it takes a while for your brain to get the memo and begin to try and go back to producing what it was getting flooded with. Cocaine is the same idea. The brain makes much less dopamine in the regular use of cocaine, and you have to go through a withdrawal period. There's a kind of anhedonia, a kind of inability to feel pleasure, temporary but not easy to get through until your brain goes back to manufacturing. So you pay for that excess. You pay for those hits of dopamine because you come down from them. And with Dilar, this is one of the side effects that you can't tell the difference between words and things. In fact, so you go back to an imaginary state. And when he says to Mink, hail of bullets, Mink hits the ground as though a machine gun had just opened up on him. So to some degree, this refusal to factor in death infantilizes, puts us back into a pre-verbal state. And Jack, on the one hand, Jack is right when he says all plots move deathward. But they move deathward whether you have plots or not. So Jack's thinking maybe if you don't plot, if you don't see a path, you won't die. And what everyone seems to keep forgetting in this novel is, and then you die anyway, because that's a biological endpoint, and it can't be superseded by technology and innovation. I mean, certainly we can live longer, and the average life expectancy has gone up incrementally over the years. I think we take that as, we cling to that as a kind of Godot. Like let's have 80 be the lifespan, 90, 100, 110. But again, we may be missing the point. What difference does it make how long you're alive if you're not living? Um, and living is loss. Your one's awareness of living is accompanied by a sense of loss. But certainly when you're getting older, somebody in my position, I can't. It's no longer. Can't see next year as when you're in 10th grade, my next year I'll be in 11th grade, and then 12th, and then I'll get my driver's license. I've done all of that. That's the coming years. If I try and view them that way, I can only view them as a diminishment, and I don't think they are. But I think we're such an ageist culture that growing older is seen as diminishment, but only using the metrics that are supplied by the ideology of capitalism. But the Treadwells are a good example of how there's little to no place for the elderly in the ideology of capitalism. They don't even consume that much anymore. So they're not even a worthwhile demographic. They're very disposable. And so it's telling that they get lost in the mall for 4 days in a cookie kiosk. And then the woman, his sister, dies a few days after from what's described as lingering dread, uh, somehow getting trapped and lost in that mall. They were overwhelmed by the mall and they couldn't figure out how to get out. It was like a terrible maze. But that's the entrapment of the elderly who are seen as too slow, and they can't cross the street, they can't go shopping. Once they're in a retirement home, they're not really consuming at all. And no one wants to say this out loud, and I certainly don't believe it. But somehow that's how we can see rather starkly that consumption is life. That's the twisted ideology here, because then someone who's no longer an active consumer is their life is no longer, there's no metric for the relevancy of their life. We're a very odd culture, and don't seem to revere the elderly for having lived a life and therefore having a wisdom that we have not yet attained. Other cultures, many other cultures, have a reverence for the elderly. But because we put so much emphasis on technology and innovation, the elderly look kind of silly, like they don't know how to text. They have no clue, and kindly grandchildren are trying to keep their grandparents in the loop by signing them up for Facebook, and it's sweet. But what happened to living as an acquiring of wisdom? Instead of, you know, the old aren't wise, and they're not even accumulating anymore. So what's their relevance? What's their value? And there's even that capitalist idea that anyway they're living on pension now. They're too old to work. So why are we paying them to hang around? Um, so anyway, I should wrap this up and just look forward to your questions on the open classroom that we'll be having on Wednesday at 11. I'll also post some notes that that will be a little more concrete presentation of what I've said here tonight. And I'll close with one personal story about the degree to which our life is manufactured for us and handed back. Back in the day when I took my kids to Disney World, which was quite something. You can imagine me in Disney World. And we parked our car under Goofy or whatever and headed for the rides. And I was marveling at how Disney World had perfected this illusion that it's fun to stand in line for 2 hours. And not unlike the most photographed barn in America, when you're in Disney World, they tell you where the best place to take the picture is. The Kodak picture taking moment. You're supposed to stand on this spot and point your camera so you can get the Magic Castle or whatever it is. So we did our rides, and we did the monorail, and we looked at the topiary below where the bushes are trimmed into the shape of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, and it's like, wow, how do they trim those bushes? That's amazing. And we got off, and then somehow I probably took some wrong turn. I don't follow directions that well, but we got lost. I could see where my car was, but everything was saying I couldn't go that way. And so I said to my kids, I was like, screw it, I'm exhausted. We're gonna hop this fence. We're gonna walk through the topiary quickly, and that's my car, and I'm damned if I'm gonna walk around the whole of the thing. So we got over the fence and we quickly moved through the topiary. And as we passed the bushes, we saw that they were plastic. But no one ever knows that because you're not allowed to walk in there. I could be shot for even sharing this. Um, that I know that the topiary in Disney World is fake, but it doesn't look fake from the monorail, and they've designed it so that it's not a garden you walk through, so everyone thinks those bushes are real. And in a way, that's to me that's commodity culture in a nutshell. It looks real, and then you don't notice that you're restricted in relation to the commodity, so that so that the delusion that it's wonderful and magical can be maintained. Okay, so hopefully nobody from the CIA is listening in on this tape. You guys have a good evening. We'll talk some more on Wednesday. I did post grades. I do have a little homework to do, a bunch of the email midterms I got to post, a few other little housekeeping, excuse me, details. One or two midterms had to be tracked down, but it wasn't a problem. There's no panic, but it's a big operation. I often tell people doing this class is like being the captain of a cruise ship. Like you can make a decision, and then it takes a long time to turn the direction of the ship. And I don't even want to think about the Titanic, but I've long been aware in this class that I have to keep a sharp eye as far ahead as possible because it takes time to do anything with with 400 passengers. So thank you for your patience, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.